Okay, boys, I've done a video on these wonderful controllers right here before. The Steam controller, of course. I think everyone knows that one from the Steam Deck. And then you've got the nice 8-bit Do N30 Pro. That one I think a lot of people are familiar with. I haven't used it as much as I really should, but I might need to replace the battery in it. Who knows? Then there's this one that I've used for playing Earthbound a few times before. I've got two of these. So, I mean, it's perfect for multiplayer if you don't play emulation with a multi-tap per se, multi-tap. And yeah. Then here's the Switch Pro controllers that are both wired USB. I've got the cables for them. They're obviously not on them right now, but they are detachable and they do need to be attached when you use them. But you've got the GameCube style, which clicks, of course, and then the Pikachu style that I've used to play Power World with to just, dab on it. But the reason why I bring this up is because I've basically doubled my controllers here to the point that I could, host an emulation party. So, to start off with two of my more recent, kind of more standard acquisitions are these two. So, this one's pretty simple. It's just your basic Xbox controller that's Power A. It's got the triggers. It's got the triggers on it, so you can adjust the triggers. I mean, it's an Xbox controller. It's wired. Of course, it came with a cable, so there's that. It's got the back paddles like this one does. So that's really cool. I've used it once or twice to play Power World for the most part, or a couple other things, but basically it fits in with the rest of these controllers to fulfill the whole experience of being able to do multiplayer emulation games of whatever I want to. This one is the one that's more in depth. This is the MGC or whatever Switch controller. So you can see it's got the Switch layout here, but it has magnetic plates, so you could detach this. You've got the underside there. I could switch it with the white one, but I've got the black one on currently. And so you've got your turbo. So this is your mapping button right there. Or no, you've got the button right here on the back for mapping stuff. You've got the button on the front here. Buttons all over the place. And so it's got turbo you can do with it built in. You can adjust the stick sensitivity inside the controller for each stick individually. And then you've got the remappable back paddles. So it's got a couple different modes to it. So if I were to wirelessly connect it to something, it would show up in Switch mode. So it would show up a Switch controller to my Steam Deck, for example, or to my Switch. If I were to wire it directly, it would show up as an Xbox controller. So it would have the same layout as an Xbox controller. So it's pretty nifty, and I've used it a couple different times, including to play Power World, because, it just works really, really well. And it's actually smaller than the Switch controller and even the Xbox controller. So in some ways, it's more compact, although I could use the N30 Pro instead and have an even more compact package. But these are all cool and dandy and all. So with these four, I could have a whole multiplayer RetroArch or whatever party going on and be playing games just fine. Everybody would know these pretty well. But I wanted some controllers for something more specialized. And so if I kind of clear these out a little bit, I'm going to use these as a line to show where I'm at, kind of. And then we're going to go and bring out two of the boys that I acquired that just came in the mail yesterday. So these two are kind of special in that they're just like the Nintendo 64 controllers, shaped just like it. And they don't have all the accessories that a standard Nintendo 64 controller has, but they're the translucent colors. Much like the classic controllers, you've got the jungle green and then you've got an orange. So there's no expansion slot in here, but you have all the same buttons. So you've got the same exact layout going here as your standard Nintendo 64 controller. This controller has kind of a slight loose joystick, but these ones are special in that the joysticks can actually pop out. So you've got kind of the stick in the center, and yeah, so let's not lose that already. So they did send a couple extra joystick pieces for it so that you can replace it with this set here. Come on. So you can just set it in. I have seen like super controllers that had the same joystick style. My one gripe with it is because of the thickness of the joystick, you can't quite feel when it notches into the corners or when you hit the corners as well because of how wide it is. It just doesn't set well in the octagonal corners there. But you can see it's pretty identical. And this is a standard controller, except for the fact that I tore the controller apart and took a purple controller and put the back on it. And I do have the other controller that the donated shell came from. So I've got two controllers that are flip-flopped in colors. I could do the same here, which would be fun. But yeah, it has the same basic designed board and everything else in them too. So a couple different things that I noticed with these controllers as I was testing them out is they are kind of quirky in that I ran them through Steam to do a test, and they seem to come up as PlayStation controllers because they register as D input, direct input, so which is interesting rather than X input, which seems to be standard but isn't. And so you've got some of the buttons over here. You've got your quadrant buttons that generally show up as A, B, and then two of the lower C buttons here. And then you've got the two upper C buttons that show up as select and start. And then the start button comes up as guide. So for some applications, I've noticed that start button will not be recognized in like Ship of Harkinian, so that you can use that button. And in RetroArch, I had to take that button and remove it from my configuration as like a RetroArch overlay toggle, because otherwise if I tried remapping the start button to start, it would bring the overlay up and then like go into start and things like that. Other than that, you've got Z is pretty standard, and then L and R show up as bumper buttons. So you've got Z as the trigger, and then L and R are bumpers. So Ship of Harkinian has basically triggers as the default L and R, which you use to switch screens. But then all of a sudden you're trying to switch screens with the R button, and you can't do that because it's a bumper. So today, during the stream, I had to use SC controller to remap the R button to a trigger, right trigger, so that I could actually go through the screens properly. But I mean, it wasn't that big of a deal. Now I have a new layout for it, but yeah. Other than that, it is pretty standard. D-pad does D-pad stuff. And yeah, so testing it in Steam, I noticed that. I'm going to have to submit a bug report, I think, to Ship of Harkinian to figure out if that can be remedied. But it would be pretty cool to be able to use this without having to use another program in order to get the start button working, which is kind of the biggest quirk with it. Other than the fact that by default the A and B's were kind of flipped and the C buttons weren't exactly mapped correctly straight off. So like the right C button was mapped as start, and then some of the buttons weren't quite mapped at all either. So there were some interesting quirks with trying to get it to run, and I think that's because of the way that it was detected in D input And I think that could be switched up so that it worked better both with RetroArch and with, Ship of Arcanian. Because I'd have to grab the vendor information to be able to submit it. But I said that these aren't the only two controllers that I got. I got two more in the mail as well. So moving these up. And these controllers basically come in the same brand as these controllers. So these are basically Hori pad style controllers. And you can see we've got both our Z buttons here and then L and R. So these kind of run into some of the same quirks as these ones do, is the start button gets detected as a guide button. A and B were actually correctly detected this time around, but then you still had like the upper button and the quad buttons on a PlayStation controller, and then start select up here. So you kind of ran into that. D-pad, joystick, standard stuff was pretty okay. Not everything was mapped in Ship of Arcanian by default, again, of course. But the advantage you had with this is even though these two buttons, triggers up here, or buttons are labeled Z, they are detected as two separate. So you basically have your R1 and R2 and L1 and L2 buttons. You're basically just lacking the joystick and some of the other stuff in here. So again, this is going to be something that's going to be slightly different, but it seems to be detected because it came from the same company as these. When you look at the box, it's pretty identical in the branding and all that. So these ones will detect very similarly in that the start button is recognized as a guide button like on your controllers otherwise. So like an Xbox controller, it would be detected as like the guide button up here on all four of these controllers. And of course there's no clicks. So there are going to be a couple different things that like will have to be worked with between RetroArch and Ship of Arcanian to try and sort these out. Or it could be just a kernel thing on top of it. But they do work. They work pretty well once I figured out remapping them in SC controller, getting the Xbox layout properly going, and then I could work with it from there. So maybe these ones would work better in Ship of Arcanian because of the buttons here that you can use as both L and R as separate buttons. But yeah, so basically I wanted these as Nintendo 64 party standards so that for something like playing Smash or even Smash Remix, which is the Smash ROM hack, they could be played pretty easily with these, and it would follow the same layout, because it can sometimes be jarring to be playing with a controller like this and have your buttons not quite match what you're trying to do. But I also wanted the nostalgia factor to go with it too, and the factor of I've always wanted a Hori pad, and these were kind of some of the options that I had. You'll also notice that the joystick is different on these pads. It's very, very much like the GameCube controller joystick. And that's what the Hori pad had on it. It doesn't click just like the GameCube joystick controller and things like that. So, yeah, these are my new acquisitions. They are going into my pile of controllers, and I will be using them for streams for certain games, of course. So, however I'm feeling, I may switch between one or the other, but this is basically nostalgia fuel, and yeah. If you enjoyed the video, then like, comment, subscribe, feed the algorithm, boost the video up, share this video with your friends. If you found it informative or you just want to chat, I've got plenty of places in the description, Discord, Guilded, and what have you. Check those out, and I will see you guys in the next one.